Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon and welcome to a brand new show called Truth to Power with myself, Faraz Patel. And of course, on the show, we will be discussing a range of issues with leading politicians, newsmakers, social, political, and economic issues that are being dealt with within South Africa. And of course, it is Workers' Day, so a happy Workers' Day to all our viewers out there. Of course, 1.5 million workers are set to return to South Africa after a 5-week lockdown. Of course, the economy has gone through a massive sort of a damage so far. So, of course, those 1.5 million workers returning will bring the needed stimulus back to our economy. But still, a lot of work has to be done as the world is currently going through a recession. Of course, we are going to be discussing and wrapping up the stimulus package that was announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa last week, and of course, Minister of Finance Tito Mboweni. And of course, in the second half an hour of our 1-hour show, we will be talking about the cigarettes and the alcohol U-turn that government did, and of course, state-owned enterprises. SAA Express is set to be going through liquidation. So the question is, what happens to the main airline, SAA? Now, to discuss all of this with me, I have renowned economic analyst Clive Ramatibela-Smith. Clive, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, brother. Lovely to see you again after a while.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's been a very, very long time, Clive. Clive, I hope that you weren't like the citizens of Sea Point in Cape Town who decided to take a little walk on the promenade.
I'm sure those are Liverpool supporters. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Walking alone there. So, Clive, let's obviously talk about the stimulus package. It was announced of 500 billion rand and of course went up to 800 billion rand. How did government get to those sort of amounts right there to of course add up to the 800 billion rand, that was announced last week by President Cyril Ramaphosa and Minister Tito Mboweni?
So one of the things, as you know, Farid, that has been puzzling the country is that obviously finances have not been in good order. One of the things that we found out not so long ago is that obviously there's people who are continuously dragging down our economy. I'm talking about Moody's here. But other than that, the tough economic status that South Africa finds itself in is not just individually South Africa or isolated to South Africa, but there's a number of countries as well that have felt it. But this money, this 500 and an additional 300 billion rand is obviously from the fiscus. Now, you would remember that the president made a few concessions of what they're going to be actually doing to try and raise this particular amount of money. One of the things that he mentioned was that they're going to obviously reprioritize or redirect the collections. This is obviously from the National Treasury front and the budget constraints. They were going to restructure those and redirect some of those assets or some of those monies that are supposed to go in terms of assisting our own fiscus to stay in line. The problem with that is obviously, as you know, that we've not been collecting enough money with regard to SARS to make sure that we sustain the collectability of the country so that we can remain stable. So there was a deficit in actual fact last year in the midterm budget speech by the finance minister that was about between 50 and 60 billion rand that was not accounted for. And then this time around again in February when he gave his speech again, there was also another deficit, meaning that we were not collecting enough money to cover our own fiscus, and that's why there's a deficit, there's a shortage. Now, why would it be that it's still possible to raise an amount of money of 800 billion rand even though there's a deficit within our budget? Is because we've claimed, or rather we've labeled this particular pandemic as a national disaster. What that means is that obviously priorities need to be given to things that will help the economy go forward. And one of those things is making sure that there's enough budget to substantially soften up the economy so that it does not take a hit from the impact of the coronavirus. So those monies are coming out from our own money. And you would remember I heard people talk about the money that was going to be borrowed from the IMF and the likes. yes, that money has been said it will be available, but it doesn't sound like we're going to go and borrow that money just yet. It needs to be approved first. So for now, the money that we're going to be utilizing is the money from private bankers, South African bankers, the Development Bank of Southern Africa, DBSA, and some of it is going to obviously come from the National Treasury in reprioritizing some of the commitments for the year 2020.
Clive, you spoke about the IMF and the World Bank. Now, I know there's various political parties that are completely against this, the EFF being one of them. I spoke to Al Jamaa, who also sits in Parliament. The DA, of course, they for the approaching of the IMF and the World Bank. So various political parties having their say with regards to this. What are the pros and cons of going to institutions like this?
Yeah, so I mean, the IMF, the World Bank, and all other institutions of finance work the same way as the banks do. The only difference is that you qualify if you're, firstly, you need to be obviously a democratic country. Then also you have to have a proven track record. Now, let me put it on record. South Africa has never, ever had to use monies coming from the IMF and the World Bank. In actual fact, we've taken some money from the UN, but it was also on the premise that we were going to be fighting serious disease in South Africa, for example, HIV and AIDS. So we have taken money in that light, and that money does not have the kind of regulatory requirements that the IMF and the World Bank would normally want if they want to take money, if you want to borrow money from them. Secondly, the money was firstly understood. If you listen to the Minister of Finance a couple of weeks ago, he was speaking as if this money, well, we know that there's money that's been put aside by the IMF and the World Bank to assist in fighting the pandemic COVID-19. However, they had described this money as a grant as opposed to money that you'd be lending that requires you to pay back. After some clarification last week and the beginning of this week, we've heard that there's slightly a little bit of a misunderstanding. It seems to be there is some form of regulatory requirements for you to qualify for that particular money, and that could mean that the country then is held at ransom for the debt it takes from these particular institutions. Now, is the political sphere is what you've been hearing, where you hear the DA, the EFF, the IFP, all these political parties saying, do we have to go to these guys, because you know what happens if you don't pay them? They take your airports, they take your ports of entry, they control the assets of the country. And yes, we've seen them do that, but that's because those people hadn't paid their money back. The question is, will we be able to pay them back? And if those are the regulations in terms of a sovereignty fund like the IMF is and the World Bank is, then we would have to identify why they want to, why we want to take that money, or do we need that money in the first place? Because as far as I understand National Treasury and what was explained by the Ministry of Finance, there were monies that were put aside for such instances as an emergency would occur, like in the case that we have currently right now. The question is now, will that money, if they do end up going and borrowing from the IMF or the World Bank, will there be such regulatory requirements, or will there be things that will be attached that the country would have to commit to so that they be able to be involved in terms of our own fiscus and our own economic policy in terms of our domestic economy? So those things are the things that worry a lot of political parties, including the African National Congress.
Clive, I mean, you talk about monies that, could South Africa pay back? We've seen monies going missing during numbers of years of looting. Now, 20 billion has been allocated to municipalities, of course, that with regards to food parcels or healthcare or whatever the case may be. How worried should Treasury and the South African ruling party be in terms of looting? Because we've seen looting happen on higher scales. We've seen looting happening in the past few weeks where the ANC have been giving it to their comrades in terms of just giving them the money, and the money is not going to the necessary department. So how worried should Treasury and the ruling party be with regards to the potential of looting happening?
It's a tough one. I mean, I think that the government has the authority to do what is right in terms of dispensing those monies to make sure that they sustain the economy. The rippling effect and the negative effect in that matter would be that obviously the small businesses, for example, in terms of the UIF, the Unemployment Insurance Fund, which people have been, it's been overflooded now with claims, people claiming to assist to require assistance for the period that they went through over the 6 weeks of lockdown, that they need help to sustain those businesses. If those businesses are not helped, that means those businesses will be closed. Secondly, the money that was supposed to be utilized that has been lended, or our understanding has been made available through the private banking sector, which is a portion of that 200 billion rand that's coming directly from the National Treasury as a guarantee for business to borrow from. So that money also needs to go back. But if it's not filtering down to the people who are affected, if the money is not filtering down to the small medium enterprises and other businesses that require that money to survive, then we have a problem, because obviously it's not going to be possible for us to sustain the economic effect. We're already talking about a GDP number just for 2020 sitting at -6%. That is catastrophic, my friend. You cannot have South Africa with an unemployment rate currently, as we know it, at 29%, that it will go further down and lose even more jobs. Estimated about 1.5 million jobs could be lost by the end of this year. So it's government's prerogative to make sure that they actually make sure that that money does translate to economic activity, that it goes down to the people that matter the most, small to medium enterprises, and to make sure that they sustain our economy by making sure that those funds are utilized appropriately. If not, then obviously the government will have to take responsibility for the collapse of the South African economy.
And that is something, of course, the government won't want to have, especially during a pandemic. You spoke about the GDP, Clive. It's forecasted to shrink by 6.1%. I mean, I've been hearing Minister Thulas Nesi last week saying over 1 million to 2 million people added to that could be unemployed. I heard Minister Tito Mboweni during a portfolio meeting yesterday saying that it just looks very dire at the moment. How worried should South Africans be that the unemployment rate now could rise to levels we've never seen before?
Yeah, very good question. I think that I believed, Fareed, in the response that governments took when they tackled this pandemic. I believe that the president made the right decisions in terms of implementing the lockdown. I think, however, and this is where the conspiracy theories start, and I'm going to get into trouble, but I will hold you at ransom for that. So here's the issue.
Yeah.
We want to obviously rectify the economy. The money has been made available for us to do so. The problem is that the implementation phase in under any presidency since our new democracy has been very difficult to implement anything that government proposes, that government tries to implement, even our own economic policies that have failed flat from start, because people are not implementing what they're supposed to be doing to make sure that the economy happens. And that's why it hasn't turned around fast enough. Now, if I listened to the conversation, particularly when it comes to the money being utilized, particularly from public works, from Department of Trade and Industry, from the Department of Economic Development, when I hear what they're talking about, including Treasury themselves, which is the Department of Finance, they seem to be having this the right conversation. The problem is not the right conversations to be had. The problem is the implementation of that conversation and making sure that it actually assists the economy. If that doesn't happen, you're going to have a serious problem. Because I don't think currently South Africa needs to be losing jobs. We're supposed to be showing that we are sustaining our jobs. If you look at where they've highlighted where the criteria, or let me put it this way, where the hotspots are of our economy, they've identified things, for example, such as agriculture, agro-processing, manufacturing, and so forth and so on. And those things are the ones that sustain our country. So if those monies are not don't penetrate and they don't get to those people that need it the most, then obviously we're going to have a collapse of the economy. But at the same time, looting that you're referring to and the mismanagement of money the improper utilization of budgets that's been afforded by Treasury, the municipalities themselves having not had very good auditing results. All those things then start to come into the face of it. And the question is, will they be able to manage it? And the truth is, we don't know.
Yeah,
And
no,
that's the sad part.
definitely, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know. And we'll only know once we come out of this crisis, at the end of this crisis, when we then go back and evaluate, did the 500, 800 billion rand actually have an effect on sustaining the economy? It's going to be a hard hit. We know that there's going to be places places that we cannot save, that we know. That's unfortunate and that's sad and catastrophic. But where we can, if we do utilize all the elements that's been discussed by government, I think the financial services sector in this country has a way to make sure that this money does penetrate to the very bottom end of it, and it should be able to do as well for even governments within the small municipalities around the country. So if we can do that, I think we'll be able to survive. But it rests, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, it rests on our leaders to make sure that they implement what's been put forward as a plan to fight the COVID-19 pandemic.
Clive, I'm going to discuss obviously SARS after the break, but I want to talk about the 70 billion tax relief scheme that has been available. Now, I know this will come as a relief to a lot of the informal sector, especially SMMEs who really need to just have the tax burden taken off them. But do you believe Treasury has had the right amount of consultation with SARS in making sure that this 70 billion tax relief scheme has been okayed by SARS? Because listening to Mr. Kieswetter yesterday, it just kind of felt as if SARS themselves are suffering in terms of cash income.
That's no surprise. To be honest with you, I'm not surprised that they've got a problem with cash. I'm hearing that even the small business fund that was initiated for helping small to medium enterprises is running out of money. The president confirmed that yesterday. So obviously there's a serious problem. There's a shortage of funds. Government and National Treasury must make sure that those funds are made available so that we don't have an even further problem in making sure that what they've recommended is implemented. So I think with SARS, for example, I've mentioned a few numbers. I know that for the midterm budget last year, they were sitting with about 50 billion that was short. It was extended again this year with the budget speech from Minister Tito Mboweni to about another additional 70 billion rand. That's short. So there are other effects, and maybe we can discuss it in more detail. But just to touch on things that will help in terms of SARS to make sure that they have a better revenue collection. I'm thinking that this will be maybe tougher next year, because then the effect of what's happened in March and April and May of this year we'll only see the impact of that next year. But we have collected money. We want to know how much to date. We only know up until February, which means that what was collected then, which is about 1.4 trillion rand, that money was supposed to be utilized for the year 2020 and 2021. With the restructuring of budgeting, it means that that money now might not have to do the things that they were going to do. They might have to reprioritize and make sure that they cover the crisis, which is the pandemic right now. And also what they need to do is they need to now check where else are they going to get assistance. Because what I think the problem is, my friend Fareed, is that we have given so much money to SOEs, state-owned enterprises, trying to keep them alive, trying to keep Eskom alive, trying to keep SAA alive, trying to keep Transnet alive. These are the things that have been milking our budget and making it difficult for us to save. So if you can cut a little bit of budget on that, maybe then government will feel the pain as well, as much as all the other private sector businesses will feel in terms of their budgeting and reprioritizing their budget towards sustaining the economy.
Well, that's obviously going to be an interesting way. What happens with regards to SARS and the allocation of money? As Clive has mentioned, we see that there are still a shortfall with regards to that. Well, coming up after the break, we will still be talking with Clive Ramatibela-Smith, but we will be discussing state-owned enterprises, especially one South African Airways. What is the future of South African Airways after this week? SA Express has now been filed for liquidation. So stay tuned to Truth to Power right here on ITV Networks. Welcome back to Truth to Power with myself, Faraz Patel. Of course, we were discussing the fiscal policy of South Africa, the stimulus package with regards to COVID-19 rescue package. And we are joined, of course, on Skype by Clive Ramatibela-Smith, markets and economic analyst. And for the last 20 to 24 minutes, we are going to be discussing state-owned enterprises and, of course, none other than South African Airways. And Clive, thank you so much once again for staying with us. Clive, I want to talk about SA Express. How did it come to this airline getting close to being liquidated?
I think if I have the answer to that, my friend, you and I would be very, very wealthy. But I think let's look at the factors that led us to where we are in terms of South African Airways. We know the troubles that have been there, and while I want to agree that there was foul play in terms of some of the CEOs that have been there that have partaken in these particular SOEs. But in this particular one, I just want to show you an example of how bad policy that can be very well vested, that can really reap good results, can easily be swayed away from what its original purpose was and become something very ugly and turn out to be the way where we are sitting now today. We're talking about a failed SOE in the likes of South African Airways. So one, the South African Airways was one of the proud commodities of this country. SAA was well established in terms of its trips when the government of democracy took over in 1994. By 1998, they had already come up with a strategy of how to make it more South African, and I'm talking about it representing more South Africans in terms of people who work there and the trips it would take, and to extend its route line from here to all the way till we even got at some point, you remember, in 2004, where we were approved licensing to land in airports around the world, including the United States of America. So we've done an exceptional job in getting this carrier to where it is. Here's the problem. The policies that were implemented were supposed to assist in it becoming more and more attractive and making money. Now, I remember a certain billionaire and the likes of Richard Branson saying that if you really want to lose money very quickly in terms of investments, the best place to do that is to own an airline. And the reason why he says that is simply because the cost parameters of running an airline are so expensive that if you invest now, your return on investment can take up to 15 to 25 years before you can really reap the rewards of an airline. And that's the reason. The reason is because it's so hard with the cost and the controlling of fuel prices, the controlling of airlines, the regulatory components, getting qualified pilots on board, technicians, aerodynamical individuals who are qualified in aerospace who can actually run. So it's so many things involved. And even as it was firstly announced in 2014 that South African Airways is getting into trouble and they were not being able to even pay their own employees, we knew at that point that something had gone wrong in terms of policy. Despite us maybe wanting to blame the CEO, yes, She played a role at some point, or former CEO. But the real core of it is, at the real core of it was the failure to implement transformational measures within the state-owned enterprise. But over and above that, was to make sure that it is well maintained. You'll be surprised how much of a difference maintenance can do to a company like SAA. And they failed in all three aspects of running a proper airline, and that's the reason why we sit where we're sitting. And I know people will say, yeah, but what about the budget? What about the racism? What about no? Fundamentally, any CEO who's trained, who's qualified, who's actually coming from a background of business administration should understand the basis of each and every industry that they go in, laying out a platform for you to be able to implement policies that will assist the company to survive. And unfortunately, in all five CEOs post democracy, I reckon only two seem to have been getting it right, and the rest, unfortunately, have failed. And that's the reason why we sit where we're sitting currently.
Clive, I mean, bailouts after bailouts after bailouts. I mean, this has been the theme for South African Airways in the past decade. Now, of course, last week, Minister of Public Enterprises Pravin Gordhan said no more bailouts. Whatever money South Africa has in its fiscal plan is now going to be used for the stimulus package for COVID-19. Now, there are rumors going around, and I want you to maybe, if you have any knowledge about this, just to confirm this, that South African Airways could be sold to a privately owned investor. Now, I just need you to correct me if I'm wrong with regards to that, but if it is going to be to a privately owned investor, who are the names that have been thrown around, Clive?
I'm sure your name has been thrown as well.
Imagine that.
But here's the thing. I know for a fact that early this year, Sir Richard Branson made comments to the effect that he might be interested in looking into the state-owned enterprise. So he did make those statements. I know. I was listening to the interview that he gave to Sky, the British television network. And I also know that there are a number of Middle Eastern companies that are keen on having a bigger share, not complete control, but a majority shareholder in the state-owned enterprise. So those are the rumors I can confirm because I've seen the articles, I've read the articles, and I've heard the interview as well. What we don't know is in the state in which it is in, which is in business rescue mode, even business rescue practitioners, and this is what's scary about this, don't have the money to do the work that they've been assigned to do. Now I don't know, I'm not an expert, but I only know economics, and in economics, it becomes impossible for you to produce if you don't have produce. And let me explain what I mean by that. I mean, you need the resources to be able to produce. And in manufacturing plants, for example, if you're producing knickknacks or snacks, you need maize, you need oil, you need machinery to be able to manufacture the product. Without that, then you're not able to have any business whatsoever. In this instance, what they're telling me is that there's so little resources to make the business work that somebody who would really want to be buying it will want to buy it at a flat rate, what they call flat rate, meaning at basically zero, maybe buying just assets that are left. So now that is a problem because that means that person then is saying they'll take a risk, so they'll buy it at zero, so government won't make money from it. And secondly, what it means is that then they would have to now put in money again to resuscitate the business to take it back to maybe where it was. Now that's risky, my friend. I don't want to lie to you. That is huge risk. And whoever understands airlines and airline careers knows how expensive they are to run. So this person has to have a big pocket even after COVID-19. So I'm hoping that there is such a thing. We would like to see South African Airways survive. I'm sure you would like it as well. It's a South African brand, and we're very proud of it. And we want to see it succeed. So whether it succeeds under government or it succeeds under a private investor, for me, all I really want to see is this business actually up and flying again and making profitable trips around the world.
Clive, but of course, mentioning that, let's just say Sir Richard Branson does say, okay, I'm going to put some sort of investment into the airline. This isn't the post-Margaret Thatcher era where he wasn't dealing with unions in the UK. He comes to South Africa, he's dealing with various number of unions, including two within the tripartite alliance. I'm talking about COSATU and the South African Communist Party. And then he's dealing with other political parties who could be potentially against Sir Richard Branson buying South African Airways. So that surely has to be another risk that he may consider.
All of it is risk, Faraz. I mean, I think for me, if I'm in an investor's shoes, I would look at what is the potential. What sells to most investors is not just the idea of having an airline, but it's the potential, and that's why you do things like due diligence. And and I'll help you. I'll help you if, and your viewers. You remember, I would prefer somebody like a Richard Branson, who firstly owns an airline in Virgin Atlantic. So he's been in the space. He understands how to run an airline, what is required, and he's done it successfully. One, two. He's done business a lot in South Africa and the African continent. So he's done business. You know, he's sold his Virgin Active franchise a couple of years ago. But he's done business here. He understands the unionization of the country, the labor market, and how it responds to things such as wages, salaries, and benefits in terms of working in an environment such as this one. So I think he'll definitely take those things into consideration. And he has said he loves the country. So, I mean, he's always in Cape Town and he's always in Durban because he says he enjoys it here so much. So,
we seem to have lost Clive Ramatibela Smith there. Well, we're going to try and get him back on the line, of course. Jim, just mentioning various points there, of course, with regards to Sir Richard Branson potentially going, oh, there we go, we've got Clive back. Clive, you were mentioning about, obviously, the steps that he would have to take with regards to the potential buying of SAA. I seem to have lost him again. Well, we're gonna try and be getting Clive Ramatibela Smith back on our screens there. Of course, he's just mentioning obviously all of the stuff there. We got him back there. Playing a little bit of tricks on us, Clive, with regards to the network. But of course, you were mentioning just the outlook of Sir Richard Branson's familiarity with South Africa.
Yeah. So I would prefer somebody like him who understands the dynamics of the South African business environment, who understands the labor environment in South Africa, the wages, the labor activities that you just mentioned.
We've been losing Clive over there, of course. Number of network issues that have been happening in the country. So, of course, he was just giving an outline with regards to how Richard Branson could go ahead and get the familiarity with regards to SAA. We're going to be coming back to you shortly, and hopefully we'll have Clive back on our screens. Welcome back to Truth to Power. Apologies for that technical delay there from Clive Ramatibela Smith, who we have back on Skype. Clive, I think our communication or lack thereof is the same as the National Command Council and, of course, the Presidency of South Africa. There is a definite miscommunication there. So thank you so much for holding on, Clive. Clive, just to wrap things up, I don't want to talk about the politics of the cigarette and the alcohol decline in revenue that has happened in the last month, but listening to Mr. Kieswetter, the SARS governor, yesterday, and I just want to give maybe the viewers an idea of how much has been lost. With regards to beer sales, 664 million, wine sales, 300 million, spirit sales, 400 million, and cigarettes, 300 million. Clive, how big is the alcohol and cigarette industry in South Africa?
Yeah, to answer the question in a simple format, it's 6.5% of our GDP. So it's significant. That's if you only calculate the monies that are obviously being made, the monies, the what we call the net economic effect. If you take into effect, therefore, not just the net economic effect, and then you add on the total economic impact in terms of the chain of events that follow the fact that these things have not been selling for 6 weeks. Obviously, that becomes larger because then you start including, for example, Mam Kumete, Mam Nomalo, who has a shebeen and a tavern. Then you start also having to include people such as, for example, your BEE transactional costing. Now, I don't know if you're aware, but SAB and InBev, AB InBev had done a consolidated effort to get more trucks to black or people who are of previously disadvantaged background to have access to businesses that they can provide supply, for example, to townships and everywhere else in the country. Then the economic effect then extends, and I think then you can see that it's really, really sad, because then we are affecting not just the numbers or the companies in terms of their revenue, but you're also affecting people's livelihoods, which means you're affecting people's wages, the way that they earn, they make a living. So that's unfortunately the ripple effects of such a decision. You mentioned there as well, I know there was confusion with cigarettes and with beers, but what we don't also put into perspective, I think it's unfortunate, but we don't calculate this enough. You need to also, Faraz, include, whether we like it or not, the stock that was already bought before the lockdown. So sometimes people don't take that into account. So already committed sales, and if I just want to make an example so that our viewers can understand. If you look at, for example, things such as your oil prices that were hit not so long ago around the world, to such an extent that the oil price was in a negative because of contracts that were committed. So that means that people who have oil could sell it and can actually pay you to take the oil from them, which is not going to happen. Obviously, these are contracts, but the effect was that it was sitting at minus $37 per barrel, meaning that they could literally pay you money so that you can get the oil off of them. So because there was no enough space to keep the barrels of oil required, not just in America but around the world, in a lot of ports around the world, you couldn't keep that much amount of oil on and not selling. But then you had a lack of demand because obviously flights were not flying frequently enough because of lockdowns from different countries, so people were not allowed to travel. Secondly, you had people not moving mobile in terms of their vehicles, so people were not driving as often as they used to because of the lockdown. So all those things then created a situation where there was not demand for oil. That meant that obviously the price of oil then, because of the shortage in demand, went down. The same thing happened with the alcohol. And in this instance, I want to show you how terrible the effects could be. In this instance, they have now cut down the sale of any kind of alcohol or cigarettes, for example. So those people that had bought, and for example, they would have dates used before or best before. Those people will lose that money if they don't sell that stock when it is due to be sold. So now there will be old stock, they'll have to get rid of it because that's been committed already. Secondly, those people who have cigarettes and all that, sales stopped, they also then therefore cannot make profit in terms of in line with their what they would normally do in terms of when they do their cashing up at the end of the month to calculate in terms of sales. So that stock is redundant. It's stock that's not going to be there, that might not even be sold even after the lockdown has been uplifted. So those are the effects that people don't actually realize when you do stop things such as activities such as sale of alcohol or sale of cigarettes. It has a dire effect.
Close to 2 billion rand has been lost with regards to that. Clive Ramati-Smith, thank you so much for making the time for us for this last hour and joining us here on Truth to Power. Hopefully we can have you again for your wisdom and insight.
I appreciate it, my brother. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm hoping you have a lovely Ramadan.
Thank you so much. Shukran, Jazakallah so much. That's Clive Ramati-Smith, markets and economic analyst, just outlining the stimulus package for COVID-19 and, of course, the SOE crisis, especially with SA Express and South African Airways. Well, that's all we have time for you on Truth to Power. Join us again next week, Friday, for another edition of the show right here on ITV Networks. From myself, Faraz Patel, and the rest of the Truth to Power team, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.